with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. There is no commandment greater than these. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. 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 Love the Lord your God with all your heart. There is no commandment greater than these. Love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. With all your soul, with all your mind, commandment greater than these. Love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, commandment greater than these. Love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. With all your soul, there is no commandment greater than these. Love your neighbor as yourself.
Amen. This morning we're going to be looking at the story of David and Goliath, and it's a very popular story. And as I was researching and preparing for this sermon, I was shocked that I have never preached on David and Goliath. I have no notes on it. I have no sermon saved. I have no anything. And I tell you, I'm shocked because I love stories. There are large portions of scriptures I haven't preached, and a lot of those are psalms. I'm not real good with poetry, but there are large portions I have. But I'm shocked that this story, this great story, I have not dove into before. And so I'm excited to share with you this morning about David and Goliath, a wonderful story, and talk about facing our own giants. This story is a story about trusting God, and trusting God to do things even we don't understand that He can do. About overcoming those obstacles no matter what we face. Trusting God in our adversities. We are going to talk about David and Goliath in terms of understanding our own obstacles. We all have giants in our lives. We all have giants that we face. For some of us, we face financial giants. We have those months where it's like, I don't know how I'm going to make things work this month. I don't know how the checkbook's going to work out at the end of the month. I don't know how this can all work out. And so we have financial giants. For some of us, we have relationship giants. Either I'm lonely and I don't know if I'll ever find someone. Or maybe it is a marriage relationship and the marriage is broken and I don't know if it can be fixed. That type of a giant that we face. We have health giants. Words pop into our lives like cancer. And it is a terrible giant. We know the odds. And cancer is a giant that doesn't often lose. For David, his giant happened to be an actual giant. It happened to be a warrior 10 foot tall who had his sights on killing him. If you're not familiar with the story, or even if you are, I encourage you, turn to 1 Samuel chapter 17 if you have Bibles with you this morning. If not, I encourage you, go back and reread the story later on this week. It is a wonderful story. 1 Samuel chapter 17. I want to set the setting for you. Israel is at war with their arch enemy, the Philistines, and they have set up camp. And the way they've set up camp is the Philistines are on one side of the valley on the mountaintop, on the hillside, and the Israelites are on the other side of the valley on the hillside. And the battle is going to take place in the valley. And it's going to be a rumble in the valley, a fight in the valley. Down there at the bottom, it is going to be this fight between them. And so that's what's taking place. Armies on either side, ready to fight, ready to go toe-to-toe with the other side. Now Goliath comes out and he challenges the Israelite army. And this is pretty common. It's pretty common in their war times, in their battle. You have to understand, most of these people were not paid soldiers. They aren't soldiers by choice for their livelihood. That's not what they do for a living. They are farmers, kind of like a militia that's been called up to protect their homes and protect their families. That is the type of army that we're dealing with here. And we find in other places in this same time period that they don't even really have weapons other than Saul and his son Jonathan. Okay? So this is a militia type setup. They've been called and they're setting up for war, and out steps this very large man. And he challenges the Israelites and he says to them, everybody doesn't need to die. Send your best and we'll send our best, which happens to be me. And we will decide who is the winner. Who is in charge of who? Whose nation is going to be subservient to whose, and who's going to pay taxes, and who's going to give up their goods to each other. And we'll decide this by one man fighting one man. Now this is pretty common because these people, they were common men. They had farms and wives to go home to, and so nobody really wanted to die. They didn't want mass casualties. It didn't do anybody any good for everyone to die. And so this was pretty common. What was uncommon was Goliath. Goliath, if you do the math, and they talk about how tall he is, how many cubits, he is a little over 10 feet tall. He's a little over 10 feet tall. Now, I'm a big guy. I've always been a big guy. I've been a big guy my entire life, and people, they look up to you, except for my little brother. He's 6'9". And so, he's even bigger. But when you're a big guy, people look up to you, and there's always a little bit of intimidation there. Can you imagine someone that's got 4 feet on me? Can you imagine that type of height? Can you imagine how big that is? And that's what we're dealing with Goliath. Goliath is 10 feet tall, a little over 10 feet tall. And when it starts to talk about him, it says his armor weighed hundreds of pounds. Normal men couldn't pick it up. His weapons that he used were things that normal people couldn't even pretend to swing. It says that his spear was like a weaver's shuttle, and just get your imagination. You cannot fit your hand around his spear. And that's what he picks up and throws with power. And so Goliath is a big guy. He's not only big, but he was also trained to fight. He was trained to fight. Goliath was a skilled fighter, trained from his youth. And so you have to get the picture here. Not only is he big and intimidating, he has everything to back it up. I'm guessing you've known people in your life who are kind of tall and lanky, and you say, hey, I'll bet you're really good at basketball, huh? I mean, you see that in tall people. You look out and it's I'll bet he's really good at basketball. And then sometimes you see that tall person, and the first time you see him dribble the ball, you're like, he's never played before in his life. There's no way. And you see people like that. This is not the case with Goliath. And I'm not talking about basketball. I'm talking about skilled warrior. I'm talking about being a warrior and going to war. Goliath has the skills. He has been trained since he was a child. He's going up against a bunch of guys who are usually farmers and shepherds by trade. And here he is, a skilled, trained killer who has all the physical gifts. Everything going his way. Everything is on his side to win this battle. And at the beginning of the battle, Goliath comes out and he begins to talk smack. And he cries out, "Look at me. You think you can best me? You think you can beat me?" And he says, "Aren't you servants of Saul? Am I not a Philistine?" And it's probably improperly translated there. It probably should be the Philistine. Am I not the Philistine, the best Philistine you've ever seen? Am I not the example that should be for every great warrior? Let's go at it. Let's fight. You think you can stand a chance? Send out your best. I defy you. I defy your God. And these are the words of the mighty Goliath. And all Israel was terrified. The entire camp saw this man. And you get the picture that you see him walk over the hill, and at first you're like, that guy's kind of big. He gets a little bit closer, and you're like, that's a tree that he's standing next to, and he doesn't look like, what's going on? How is somebody that big? And you hear him speak, and he terrifies you. And so the entire Israelite army is terrified. They are terrified. And this is usually us when we encounter a giant in our lives. We are terrified. When we sit in the doctor's room and we hear the word cancer, when you talk to your spouse and they say the word divorce, when you realize you have an addiction to drugs or alcohol or pornography, how can you defeat this giant? And so like the Israelites, we often freeze in our fear. It just freezes us. When we encounter something that big, that scary, we just freeze. Because we don't want to take it on. And for 40 days, Goliath came out and insulted them. For 40 days, he came out and he mocked them and their God and said, "Well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do about it? I defy you, I defy your God." And he came out day after day and day in and day out. And he never stops reminding them how big he is and how they don't stand a chance and how in the end they're all going to be his servants because he's going to kill whoever they bring out. And for 40 days they cower in fear. For what can God do against someone as great as Goliath? Most of us have been filled with fear by a giant before. Mocked and told we can't defeat it. There's no winning in this situation. It takes a special spirit to go against that. Enter David. Now, David's older brothers had gone off to war. They were amongst the army. His older brothers, they were there on the sidelines when Goliath started coming out and mocking the people of God and mocking God and saying, "Hey, whoever you send, I'm going to kill." His brothers were there. And David was left at home with the sheep. He was a shepherd. Too young, too small, he's not going to do anything. Stay at home and be a shepherd, David. David's brothers were at war, but he was at home. When his father, after a month, got curious and decided to send provisions to his brothers, and so he sends David with some cheese and bread and things, and go take this to your brothers. Now David could have been upset. David could have chosen to say, "You know what, I'm not good enough to fight. I'm not going to be your messenger boy." Sometimes we get a spirit like that, don't we? Where I'm not good enough for this, well now don't ask me to do this either. If I'm not good enough to go to war, then don't ask me to be the deliverer of messages. Don't ask me to deliver the cheese. Don't ask me to do whatever it is. And David could have had a spirit like that. He could have said, "Hey, I'm a fighter and you chose to leave me at home. You're going to get what you got coming to you. I'm not going anywhere." He could have said that. But he didn't. You know, David, one of the great things about David, and you don't see it not just in this story, but throughout the stories in this time of David's life. David never seems to care or worry about what others think of him. He doesn't care what others think of him. He does care about what God thinks of him. But he does not seem to care or worry about what other people think of him. It's a common thread throughout his life. There are times where he's dancing and his wife's ashamed of him and says, "Hey, get it together." And David doesn't care what other people think of him. He cares what God thinks of him. And so David, in this situation, he doesn't act like he's mad. He's not upset that he had been left behind. Here he is. He's just going to do what he has been asked to do. And so David heads out on a simple task. Deliver the cheese, deliver the food to your brothers. Sometimes I think we come in contact with simple tasks and we say, you know what, that's beneath me. I'm not going to do that. I've got this going for me and this going for me. I don't need to worry about that. That's for somebody else. I'm not going to worry about that. And we kind of think, you know what, I'm called to bigger and better things. I don't need to do those simple things, those rudimentary things. I'm not a messenger boy, I'm a warrior. And David could have said that, but he didn't. See, David had an ordinary mission, but God had an extraordinary plan for it. In David's life, we are taught to be faithful in the small things, or you will never get the chance to step up on the big things. You have to be faithful in the small things, or you'll never get the chance to step up in the big things. And that was the truth in David's life. If he had chosen to say, this is beneath me, they never would have delivered the message. They never would have slayed Goliath. They never would have gotten the opportunity. And sometimes our best chances in life come because we're doing the small things right. Because we're doing the ordinary and what's called of us and asked of us, and we're doing it day in and day out. And sometimes that's what it looks like. Be faithful in the small, and you'll never get the chance to step up to do the big. When David gets to the battle, he hears firsthand as Goliath comes out to taunt the armies of the Israelites. Everywhere he looks, the men are hiding as this giant on the other side of the valley is over there and yelling at them and mocking their God and defying them to do something about it. And here is David, this red-haired boy. And he looks around and he's like, isn't somebody going to go kill him? I love this story because in this instance, it's in David's mind that it's, of course, somebody go kill that guy. He's mocking God. Do you think God's going to stand for that? In his mind, this is the easiest thing that has ever happened. Why doesn't somebody march over there and put that guy out? And David says it. And everybody around him's like, no, not me, I'm not going. You see that guy? There's no way I'm going to fight him. And they tell him it's been a daily occurrence. That for over a month now, that man has come out every day and has mocked us and defied our God. For a month. 40 days he has come out and he has insulted your God. And David's like, I'll kill him. I'll do it. This is when his big brother's here. And his older brother comes up to him and said, David, what are you doing? David, there's sheep to be tended to. You just go back home. You can't do it, David. You don't have it together. You cannot accomplish this. You're too small. You're too insignificant. There's no way. He tells his brother to go home. David's brother, when he does this, I think we start to realize that there's something in our lives when we encounter people, sometimes it's even loved ones, who will doubt us, who will put us down, who will try and say, you know what, you aren't good enough. Even our own relatives, because they have chosen fear over faith. And that's what I see in this story. David is one who chooses faith over fear. When you look at David's life, David looks across the valley and he sees Goliath and he sees nothing more than something that must be done. And it never enters his mind. He never mentions it. It's never put in the scriptures that he was afraid or it was like, what if I fail? What if I don't get this done? No, it's of course it's going to happen. Of course that giant's going to die. Of course we're going to win. He defied God. And so David chooses faith over fear. He says the giant will not prevail. And his brothers try and stop him, but his brothers have chosen fear. And you see it. For 40 days they've cowered. For 40 days they've done nothing as the giant has come out and mocked them. David is unswayed by their rebuke, unswayed by their trying to put him down. And David has stayed unswayed, and so he is sent to King Saul. And King Saul, it's not enough that his brother has said you're too small. I mean, you didn't even come to battle. I mean, you're not even big enough to be here. And here you are now, and you say you want to fight the biggest man I've ever seen. And King Saul looks at him and says, who are you? You're just a youth. You're not good enough. And there will always be people in our lives who tell us we're not good enough, who tell us we can't accomplish it, who say, you can't do it, who remind us that we're too small or too young or too unskilled or not special, and who call us again and again and say, you will never defeat your giants. David had plenty of doubters, but still he held to his course. David is concerned for one main reason. Now, of course, there are some perks. You know, Saul has offered his daughter in marriage to the man who does this, and so David, yeah, he's going to get to marry a princess, and there's other reward. But he's doing this because this man has defied God. Because this man has called out God, and David's like, I know I've won the battle. I know it's already over. God's just waiting for me to go and do it. It's already done. And so David is unswayed by Saul's trying to stop him. And so Saul finally relents and said, if you're going to go, then you need some armor. Now remember, in this day, these are not skilled fighters. These are mostly shepherds and farmers. You know, they don't have armor. The king does. And so the king says, you're going to wear my armor. You can take my sword. Well, there's something you need to know about Saul. Saul was chosen as king because he was heads and shoulders taller than everybody else. I think it's a great way to pick a king. As a tall guy, I like this method of picking a king, but that's kind of the way they did it. You look like a great warrior. You look like a person that people would follow. And so Saul is a tall man with he looks like a warrior, and David is not. David's a boy. And here Saul is putting his big old armor on David and handing him his big old sword. And David, this isn't fitting. I can't fight in this. God will give me the battle. God will give me the win. Just let me do it my way. So Saul relents and David heads out. David, he's not going to win a fight of swords and armor. He knows it. So David gets his stones. And the Bible says he advances on Goliath. And I think that's an important phrase. He advances on his giant. He advances on the enemy. I think this is important for us because how many of us, even if we're willing to face a giant, we don't advance. We wait for that giant to get even bigger. We wait for the problems to get worse. We wait back. We say addictions, I'll wait for it, it's not a problem yet, it's not too big of a deal yet, and we wait for it to get worse before we try and beat it. Our relationships, we wait till they're falling apart to try and fix them. Our finances, we wait until we're in ruin before we decide to fix something. And David, he didn't. He was going to face his giant, and so he advanced. He chose faith over fear. He wasn't going to hold back. And so David heads forward. And when Goliath saw David, as though David hadn't heard it enough times, as though David hadn't heard from his brother and from the king that he's too small and not good enough, here one more time, there's Goliath, and the mocking begins. There before David stood a man bigger than he'd ever seen. Better armor, better skilled, a fighting, killing machine. There before David stood his giant. The one who had mocked his God, who had insulted him. The one who said, you aren't good enough and you'll never be good enough. There stood the unbeatable, unrelenting, huge, gigantic giant Goliath, standing in front of him. And no one would have blamed David for leaving. No one would have blamed David for running. But David wasn't focused on the size of his giant. He was focused on the size of his God. And that's the most important thing for us to realize today. David wasn't focused on the size of his giant. It doesn't matter who's on the other side when your focus is on God. And David knew that from the very beginning. It doesn't matter if there's an army of Goliaths on the other side. It doesn't matter if he's 100 foot tall, because you have the God who created the universe on your side. And what can he do against your God? And David knew it. David knew it. And when your focus is on how big your God is and not how big your giant is, then fear goes away and faith takes hold. And amazing things start to happen. David wasn't focused on the size of his giant, he was focused on the size of his God. He didn't just pray that he would defeat Goliath. He didn't just beg and plead with God. No, he knew that he already had the victory. He knew that he already had the victory because God was on his side. He looked Goliath in the eyes and he said, Goliath, you come against me with sword and shield, but I come against you in the name of the Lord God of Israel. In other words, you've got a sword, but I've got something better. You may be big, but my God is bigger. Goliath, this day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will defeat you and feed your head to the birds of the air. You may be big, but my God is so much bigger. It was never about David. It was always about God. The story was never about David. It was always about how great our God is. It was always about how big our God is and what our God can accomplish when someone has faith. David took the sling, and with one stone he struck Goliath. And Goliath collapsed, and David, swordless, ran and took Goliath's sword and cut off his head. And David chose faith over fear. No one would have blamed him for running. Don't shy away from big battles. Don't shy away from the giants in your own life. When we move our focus off the size of our giant and instead focus on the size of our God, there is no giant too big. Some of you this morning have obstacles in your life. Giants. Things that are too big, that you know you can't beat. That you know you can't accomplish on your own. You have a relationship giant. You have a financial giant. You have a health giant. You have an addiction giant. Things that are too big that you know you can't lift on your own. You face giants and they're too big to overcome. Let today's message inspire you. There's nothing too big for our God to overcome. There's no giant too big. And when we stop looking at how big the giant is and start focusing on how big our God is, then there's nothing that can't be beaten. Stop listening to the voices all around you that say it can't be done. That remind you you're too small, too young, not good enough. And instead focus on how big your God is and how able He is. Focus on how unstoppable He is. Focus on the fact that there's no giant too big for Him. There's no obstacle too much. Our God is unstoppable. So today, choose faith over fear. As the praise team comes up, I want to take this chance to invite you. We're going to start a great new series next week. We're going to be looking at some vital relationships in our life. And next week we start off with the most vital relationship in our lives, and that is our relationship with God. What does God expect of us and our relationship with Him? And maybe I've been off track for a while and now it's time to get right with Him again. Or maybe you've never committed anything to God before in your life, but you've always wanted to know more. If either of those are you, I encourage you, join us next Sunday. We got a 3-week series on these vital relationships in our lives that are going to be something special. In fact, I've been planning it for over a year and I'm excited for what God's going to do in this next series. And I hope that you'll join us for that.